My name is Suzan. I'd been feeling this weird flutter all evening, like my heart was doing somersaults and my hands were just waiting to betray me. We'd set up candles around the living room, their soft glow flickering against the pale walls, and I'd carefully scattered a few of our favorite photos on the mantel, us laughing at the lake, that sunset hike, the day we adopted our dog. I kept telling myself to breathe, but it felt like my lungs had forgotten how. Every inhale felt stolen, every exhale weighed heavy. We were celebrating something huge, something I thought would bring us closer, but looking back, I should have known that sometimes joy carries its own shadow. We'd invited a couple of close friends over, just a few people, you know? Nothing big, just a quiet evening to mark the milestone we'd both been waiting for. I spent the afternoon chopping snacks, my knife scraping the cutting board in a rhythmic whisper, rinsing glasses until they gleamed like crystals, fluffing pillows until our couch looked like a cozy nest. The scent of lavender from the candles mixed with the faint tang of citrus from the cleaner I'd used on the coffee table. My partner paced around with that half grin he gets when he's as excited as I am, tugging at his collar, checking his phone, and I thought maybe tonight was the first night everything really clicked for us. I could feel the tension in my shoulders melting, and I even caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, smiling, eyes bright, maybe a little too hopeful for what was coming. Then, out of nowhere, there was that knock. It cut through the warmth of the room, sharp and unexpected. I turned, expecting our friends, but when I opened the door, my blood turned to ice. He was standing there, someone I hadn't seen in years. His face was almost a scar on my memory, a mix of warmth and pain that I thought I'd locked away forever. My throat seized up, and my fingers tightened on the doorknob like they were trying to hold on for dear life. I don't know what I said, but something like, "Oh, hey," stumbled out, and I tried to step back as if I could make him vanish. The floor beneath my feet felt unsteady, like I was floating a few inches above the ground. My partner squeezed past me, all curiosity and surprise, and I watched his face shift from open happiness to confusion in 2 heartbeats. That look, like he was trying to read a book in a language he didn't know, was the moment I felt the ground slip away. I wanted to slam the door, to tell this ghost to leave before he turned our night into something we couldn't swallow. But my hands were too weak, trembling so hard that I could see the candlelight dance across my knuckles. He stepped inside before I could blink. His smile was too easy, too familiar, like he'd never left. My cheeks flushed, and my pulse felt like it would burst through my throat any second. My partner clapped him on the shoulder, voice warm as ever. "It's been too long, man." And I stood there, frozen, trying to steady my breath. Every time that stranger laughed, I felt a fresh knot tighten in my stomach. I had thought the past was buried, its edges smoothed by time, but there he was, breathing in our space, breathing in our celebration. I hovered at the edge of the room, a silent observer to this unwelcome reunion. My hands curled into fists at my sides, nails digging into my palms, and I kept swallowing against the dryness coating my tongue. Why had he come back? What did he want now? My partner introduced us, voice gentle, curious, and I managed a shaky smile, trying to keep my voice steady. But inside, I was collapsing. Every inch of that man's presence felt like a question I'd never wanted to answer. We finally sat down around the coffee table, the snacks growing cold, the wine untouched. I watched him lean forward, eyes searching my partner's face for memories, for echoes of jokes I'd forgotten. My partner looked back at me so many times, eyebrows knitting together in concern. I wanted to explain, wanted to say, "I'm terrified," but the words got caught behind my ribs. My heart thundered in my ears, sweat beading at my hairline. My partner squeezed my hand under the table, and I realized how fragile our trust had become in these few seconds. That night, laughter turned to awkward pauses, cheers turned into uneasy glances. The candles flickered, casting shadows that danced like memories I'd rather never see again. Each creak of the floorboard felt amplified, each exhale felt laden with dread. My vision blurred around the edges of my world tilting as panic bubbled up. I stared at the rim of my glass as if it held the answers, but it only reflected my own panic-stricken face back at me. In that moment, I understood that this unexpected houseguest had already done more damage than I ever thought someone could. He'd cracked open the safety I'd built with my partner, and I wasn't sure how we'd ever put the pieces back together. I woke up the next morning feeling a weight in my chest that I couldn't shake. The sun was seeping in through the curtains, but everything felt wrong. I kept replaying his voice, his laugh, the ease he carried when he stepped into our home. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, and my jaw went stiff every time I thought about seeing him again. My partner was already in the kitchen, humming to himself and pouring coffee, oblivious to how my world had shifted overnight. I stood in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, trying to muster a normal greeting, but my voice came out thin and uncertain. I took a shaky sip, feeling the warmth slip down my throat but not reaching my heart. He asked if I slept well, and I forced a nod, swallowing the knot that formed in my throat. Our morning routine unfolded like clockwork: coffee, toast, the dog barked for attention, but I was watching him more than I was enjoying my breakfast. His smile seemed smaller, like they were borrowed rather than earned, and I couldn't tell if it was my imagination or something else creeping in between us. Each glance I stole was met with a calmness that felt too practiced, and I realized how little I understood what was going on in his mind. I tried to bring it up, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "Did you ever see him before?" I asked, voice wavering like a leaf in the wind. He shook his head and said, "No, it's been forever." But his eyes darted away when he answered, and I saw a flicker of something, guilt, maybe, or worry. I felt a sting behind my ribs, and my shoulders tightened. He ran a hand through his hair, hesitated, then changed the subject like a magician hiding a trick no one asked for. I forced a laugh, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, and told myself I was overreacting. Later, when he stepped out to run errands, I felt a pulse of relief that made me cringe instantly. My chest heaved, breath catching, as I slid onto the couch and unlocked my phone. I stared at our message thread, scrolling past the usual good morning texts until something caught my eye. There were unfamiliar words, flirty, affectionate, sent from his phone to someone else. My stomach dropped, bile rising, and I fumbled to open the other messaging app. My fingers moved without thinking, sliding across the screen until I found a name I didn't recognize. My heart pounded so loud I thought the neighbors could hear it. I closed the apps before anything else appeared, my mind blank and buzzing. When he got back, he found me pacing, phone hidden behind my back. He frowned and asked what was wrong, and I felt a heat rise in my cheeks. I didn't answer right away. I watched his face, searching for a sign that I was crazy. But I saw only concern, genuine worry, and that guilt spiked again. I told him I'd made a mistake, said I was just tired. He nodded, kissed my forehead, and said I should rest. I washed the dishes with shaking hands while he prepared dinner, each plate feeling heavy in my fingers. Later, I called my best friend, voice low and trembling as I told her about my day. I could hear her catch her breath, feel her panic through her words. She asked a million questions: who he was, why he came, if I remembered anything else. I answered haltingly, pulling my hair back and rubbing my palms together. She said I deserved honesty, that I should confront him. But when I said it out loud, my mouth went dry again, and I felt my stomach twist into knots. I ended the call promising I'd figure it out, but inside I was unraveling, nerves stretched so thin I could feel every pulse. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, each breath a reminder of the tension coiled inside me. My partner was asleep beside me, slow and even, and I envied his calm. I closed my eyes, but I could still see that other face, that intruder who had walked in without warning. My chest tightened with guilt and fear, and my temples throbbed with an ache I couldn't soothe. I felt torn, love tangled with suspicion, comfort edged by doubt. My hands found his arm, tracing the line of muscle, reminding myself that he was here, beside me. But even that touch felt uncertain, like I wasn't sure if I could trust my own skin. I drifted into a restless sleep, tangled in my thoughts, knowing that questions I couldn't ask were growing too loud to ignore. I couldn't shake the tension all morning. My hands felt cold and clammy, and every time I passed the living room table, I flinched at the memory of him sitting there, smiling like nothing had ever gone wrong. I knew I needed answers, so I slipped into our shared office while my partner showered. My heart pounded as I opened his laptop, his password was still in my muscle memory, and the screen glowed in the dim light. I clicked through folders until I landed on Vaki Pics, and there it was, a photo of him and that houseguest, arms slung around each other's shoulders, heads pressed close like they'd never been apart. The edges of the image were dog-eared, colors faded by time, but their smiles were crystal clear, brimming with intimacy I'd never seen with me. My breath hitched, stomach twisting, and I pressed my palm against the desk to steady myself. Next, I found a folder labeled Old Chats. My fingers trembled as I scrolled until I discovered a thread I'd never known existed, messages between him and the houseguest. One screenshot showed a line that froze me cold: "I miss you more every single day." The date was vague, just the app's relative tag, but it was recent enough that the timestamp said, "a few weeks ago." My vision blurred as I stared at the words, the soft blue bubbles mocking me. Proof 1, the photo. Proof 2, the message. 2 shards of evidence that cut deeper than any confession could. My jaw locked, dry mouth tasting of betrayal. My hands shook so hard I had to set the laptop aside and press both palms into my eyes. The guilt and rage wove together inside me, hot and heavy, like a storm rising. I thought of my partner's laugh, that easy warmth I'd always cherished, and realized now how much it had been a performance. My fingers itched to delete everything, to erase the proof that would shatter our lives, but I knew I had to keep it. I had to have something concrete when I confronted him. When he stepped out, wrapping a towel around his waist, I was still in the office, laptop open. He saw the screen and froze. His pupils dilated, and his hands went slack at his sides. I watched him through half-closed lids, heart slamming so loudly I could hear it over the hum of the air conditioner. He tried to step closer, but I held up a hand, voice brittle as glass. "Look." He sank onto the chair opposite me, shoulders sagging under the weight of his own secrets. I didn't need to say more. He stared at the photo, mouth opening and closing, like he couldn't find the right air to breathe. Then he looked at the screenshot, tears welling up so fast they pooled at the corners of his eyes. His jaw trembled, and I saw him swallow hard, as if trying to gulp down the guilt. My stomach flipped, and my chest ached with a mix of triumph and horror. Triumph, because my doubts had been real and not just paranoia. Horror, because the man I loved had lied to me, and the betrayal felt like a knife twisting in my ribs. He reached out, voice breaking, "Suzan, His hand hovered inches from mine, but I recoiled, chest heaving. I remembered my trembling fingers when I found the proofs, and I realized that letting him touch me now would undo the power I'd just seized. I couldn't let him off the hook. His sorrow-filled eyes burned into mine, but I stayed rigid, tears prickling at my own lids. That night, I lay awake, proofs safe under my pillow, mind racing with plans I never thought I'd make. Revenge flickered in my thoughts, slow, deliberate, righteous. I cradled my phone, imagining the text I would send that would expose everything to the world. My hands felt steady now, heart pounding with purpose. Tomorrow I would decide exactly how to repay the betrayal, but for the first time since he walked through our door, I didn't feel afraid. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, my mind looping over every detail of that conversation. Every time I tried to quiet my thoughts, my heart pounded so loud it shook my chest. I knew I couldn't stay here, waiting for answers or apologies that might never come. I needed to act, to reclaim control of my life. But my hands were still trembling, and my jaw ached from clenching so hard. When morning light seeped in through the blinds, I sat up, muscles stiff, mouth dry. I reached over to my phone and reread the proof, his words in that message, the raw confession of longing meant for someone else. My vision blurred at the edges, and I pressed a hand to my temple, fighting off the nausea that rose in my throat. I sifted through memories of his warm touches, the way his fingers used to brush against mine, and felt bile twist in my stomach. Every memory was now tainted, like a rose turned to ash. I moved through the apartment on automatic, making coffee and packing a small bag. My movements felt distant, like I was watching myself from the outside. I didn't bother sending him a text to say where I was going. The thought of explaining anything to him made my chest tighten. I left my keys on the counter and walked out the door, the click of the lock echoing behind me like the slam of finality. On the street, the air was crisp, as if the world had paused to witness my decision. I wrapped my arms around myself, jacket pulled tight, trying to chase down a spark of courage beneath the cold. My phone vibrated, his name flashing on the screen, but I didn't look. I walked faster, heels clicking against the pavement, breathing in short, jagged gulps. I knew if I stopped, if I answered, he might talk me back inside, and I couldn't risk that. I found a cafe down the block and slipped inside, heart hammering as if I had sprinted. I ordered black coffee and sat in a corner booth, pulling out my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I opened a new draft email. I stared at the blank screen, mind racing through possible words. The urge to spill everything, to paint him as the villain, was strong, but I knew I needed something more deliberate, something that would hurt him in a way he couldn't ignore. I typed a few lines, then deleted them. My chest constricted as guilt washed over me. Was I becoming as cruel as he had been? But then I remembered the nights I lay awake, stomach twisting with worry, the taste of betrayal sharp on my tongue. I thought of how he'd lied, hidden his longing behind gentle smiles. I realized I had every right to hurt him in return, to make him feel the betrayal he'd inflicted. The plan formed slowly, each detail sharpening like a blade. I would publish the messages, his raw, intimate words, and the photo proving their closeness, on a site he'd care about. I'd accompany them with a confession of my own, the trust I'd given him, the life we'd built together, now shattered by his deception. I'd let the world see the truth, let his friends and colleagues witness his betrayal. I knew it was ruthless, but my heart felt numb to mercy. By the time I hit send, my hands were steady, pulse pounding with a fierce exhilaration I hadn't expected. The email went to both him and everyone in his contact list. I closed my laptop, took a long sip of coffee, and felt something shift inside me, something fierce and resolute. I paid the bill, gathered my bag, and walked back into the cool morning air. For the first time since he showed up unannounced, I felt power coursing through my veins instead of fear. I felt a tremor run through me as I watched my phone buzz again with another reply. The email threads he'd sent rippled on my screen, forwarding his confession to friends, colleagues, everyone he knew. My heart pounded, chest tight, as I saw his reply appear, a blank, 3-word apology. I could hardly read it, my eyes stung, fingers clumsy. Why did he think that was enough? Why did any of this ever matter? I closed the laptop hard, the snap echoing in the quiet corner of the cafe. My hands shook until I gripped the sides of my chair. I pressed my temples as if I could squeeze sense into my swirling thoughts. He had shattered me, yet here I was, the one who'd dealt the blow. Revenge tasted like ash in my mouth, and I suddenly felt sick to my stomach. When I got home, the apartment felt too quiet, too still. His absence was deafening, the jacket tossed over the chair, the half-empty mug on the kitchen counter. I avoided the mantel where I'd once placed our happiest moments captured in photos. I sank onto the couch, mind racing. I wondered if he was collapsing in his own space, or if he'd already moved on, as if our life had been nothing but a faint sketch he could erase. I knew I needed more than his apology. I needed the truth, the why. I rifled through my bag and pulled out my phone. My fingers hovered before I opened a new message to the houseguest. My pulse hammered so fiercely I could almost hear it. Why did you come? I typed, each word a demand, a plea, a threat. I pressed send, hands trembling, and waited. His reply came almost instantly. I never meant to hurt you. My chest tightened again. Familiar words, empty comfort. I typed back, then why did you, and stared at the screen. The cafe napkins and coffee stains on the table and the message preview mocked me. When the answer came, cold, perfunctory, I felt my stomach drop. I was lost, he wrote. I needed to see if any of it was real. His confession settled over me like a wet blanket. He'd hurt me twice, once by returning unannounced, and again by confessing only to satisfy his own doubts. My breathing sped up, and anger coiled inside me, fierce and cold, and I knew I couldn't let it slide. I stood abruptly, the couch creaking under me. I paced the length of the room, fists balling at my sides. Socks slipped on the wooden floor as I moved. In the hallway mirror, I saw the reflection of someone I barely recognized, pale lips pulled tight, eyes rimmed red, a woman forged in betrayal and revenge. I let out a low, bitter laugh. "I am real," I whispered, voice shaking. "And you'll see that." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out an envelope I'd prepared earlier, sealing inside printed screenshots, his apologies, his confessions, and a letter I'd written, laying out every moment I'd felt abandoned, every night I'd cried. Tonight, I would slip it under his door. I would watch him find it, watch the realization dawn on his face that I wasn't some phantom he could conjure when he felt nostalgic. The adrenaline coursed through me as I stepped back into the night, the air cool against my skin. I slipped the envelope through the mail slot, heart pounding in my ears. I pressed my palm against the door, feeling its solid weight beneath my fingers, and then I turned to leave. Walking away, my steps felt lighter, more certain. The storm inside me still raged, but it had purpose now. I wasn't just reacting, I was in control. Each breath felt like reclaiming myself, piece by piece, from the wreckage he'd made. I woke before the sun touched the horizon, eyes snapping open to a silence so sharp it felt like a blade against my ears. The apartment was empty, the only sound my own ragged breathing. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat echoing through the hollow in my ribs where trust used to be. I lay still for a long moment, feeling the soft weight of the sheets against my skin, like they were trying to soothe me. But there was no comfort here, only the aftershock of every choice I'd made. I forced myself up, legs heavy as wet cement. My reflection in the hallway mirror caught me off guard, dark circles under my eyes, cheeks gaunt, lips pale. My fingers grazed the cool glass, and a tremor ran up my arm. I remembered how full I'd felt before he arrived, how bright our plans had been, and now I saw only shadows. I swallowed against the dryness in my throat and moved toward the kitchen, every step feeling like wading through molasses. The note I'd left under his door last night sat on the counter, folded and creased. I opened it again, reading the jagged lines I'd scrawled in anger and hurt. Each word felt heavier now, like it was cemented into the paper. I pressed the note to my chest, the roughness of the paper scratching my skin, and I let out a hollow laugh. Revenge had been my weapon, but somewhere along the way, its edges had cut me too. I poured coffee, black, no sugar, and the steam curled up around my fingers. My hands shook so badly I spilled a drop onto the counter, the dark stain spreading like a bruise. I grabbed a rag and rubbed at it, pressing hard until my knuckles turned white. My jaw clenched against the ache that radiated through my face. My thoughts drifted back to his apology, those 3 empty words, and I felt bile rise in my throat. I needed air. I grabbed my coat and slipped outside, the morning chill biting through the fabric. I walked without really seeing, past the quiet streets and shuttered windows, until I found myself at the edge of the park where we used to picnic on lazy afternoons. The benches were empty, the ground littered with fallen leaves that crackled under my boots. I sat on the cold wood, coffee in hand, trying to steady my breathing. Around me, the park stirred to life, joggers rounding the path, parents chasing toddlers, a dog barking at a squirrel. They all moved in patterns I couldn't follow, rhythms I'd lost. My reflection in the coffee's surface wavered with each ripple, as if reality itself was fracturing. I pressed a palm to my chest, feeling the tremor in my torso, and I realized I was on the brink of something. I just didn't know if it was freedom or collapse. I took out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found my sister's name. My fingertips hovered, heart hammering in my throat. I hit call and held the phone to my ear, waiting. When she answered, her voice was soft, cautious. I didn't have to explain, she could hear the storm in my silence. I let out a shaky breath and said, "I think I'm falling apart." The words escaped me in a rush, pain, fear, regret, all tangled together. She stayed on the line, asking gentle questions, guiding me back to a place where my voice wasn't so small. I told her about the note, my plan, how I'd watched him find it. I told her how I still felt hollow, as if the act of revenge had emptied me instead of him. My sister spoke of healing, of boundaries, of what it meant to reclaim myself without destroying everything around me. I listened, and something in her tone softened the jagged edges in my chest, just a little. When I hung up, the morning sun had eased above the trees, casting a pale gold across the bench. I sipped the last of my coffee and let the warmth spread through me, a small comfort, but enough. I folded the note into quarters and tucked it into my coat pocket, letting its weight remind me of what I'd done and what I still had to mend. I rose from the bench, legs still heavy but steadier, and started walking back. Each step felt deliberate, a promise to myself that I would find a way forward. Not by burning everything to ash, but by learning what it meant to let go, and, maybe, to forgive. I didn't know if I could ever forgive him, or even myself, but I knew I had to try. The path ahead would be crooked and hard, but at least now I had a choice in how to walk it. I returned home that evening feeling both hopeful and terrified. The buildings loomed familiar, yet every shadow looked like a reminder of what had happened. I stepped inside, coat heavy on my shoulders, and paused at the threshold. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. My heart fluttered, hands cold as I let the door click shut behind me. I hadn't known what to expect, but I wasn't prepared for the emptiness that greeted me. I moved through the rooms, eyes tracing the outlines of furniture, as if learning the shapes again. My footsteps echoed, and I realized I hadn't spoken to anyone all day. The weight of silence pressed against my ears. On the coffee table lay the letter I'd slid under his door. It was gone now, vanishing like a confession buried and exhumed by my own hand. My pulse quickened. Should I have retrieved it? Was it wrong to leave that burden behind? I walked toward the hallway and hesitated outside his room. The door was closed, breathing softly behind it. For a moment, I considered just leaving. But this time, I needed more than notes and messages. I needed honesty in person, skin to skin. I pressed my palm to the door and tapped lightly. My knuckles trembled. A muffled sound came through, then silence. "Come in," he said softly. I turned the knob and slipped inside, breath catching at the sight of him sitting on the edge of the bed. He looked up, surprise and relief mingling in his eyes. The room was dim, the curtains drawn. I took a step forward, coat still on, and his voice caught when he asked, "Susan?" I paused, words faltering as my eyes met his. His face looked smaller somehow, vulnerable. The anger I'd carried all day fluttered, replaced by something rawer, fear of what might happen next. My hands clenched at my sides, nails bending into flesh. "I wanted to talk," I managed, voice low. "To hear you say it." He swallowed and rose, brushing hair from his forehead. He stood, hesitant, just a few feet away, as if uncertain how to close the gap. He began, then hesitated, jaw locking. He closed his eyes, as if gathering strength, and finally whispered, "I came back because I realized how much I'd lost. I lied because I was ashamed and confused. I never meant to hurt you like this." His apology trembled in the air, raw and incomplete. The ache in my chest deepened, my hands loosening. I stepped closer, voice shaking. "It's not enough. Not after everything." He nodded, tears rolling down his cheeks. He reached out, hand hovering near mine. My throat tightened. My body remembered trust, remembered warmth. I closed my eyes and let him take my hand. He spoke then, voice cracking, "I'll do anything to fix this. I'll go to counseling, I'll answer any question, I squeezed his hand, cutting him off. "I need time. I need to feel safe again. I can't keep reliving the doubt." He nodded again, lips pressed tight. "Okay." We stood there, holding hands in the muted light. Silence settled around us, less heavy than before. My breath began to slow, the edges of my fear smoothing. I realized that trust would rebuild in fragments, not all at once. And maybe that was enough for now. That morning, I didn't expect peace to be so loud. The soft golden light spilled through the curtains, and I lay still, listening to his breathing beside me. Relief and dread tangled in my chest, each breath a reminder that we were here, together and fragile. I wanted so badly to believe we could rebuild, but beneath the calm, a tremor of doubt ran through me, making my hands brush against the sheets as if testing their solidity. I slipped out of bed and padded quietly to the kitchen, where the kettle hissed softly. My heart fluttered in my throat as I measured coffee grounds, hands trembling just enough to remind me of every choice that had led to this morning. The silence stretched between the walls, each drip of hot water echoing in my skull. He joined me with his mug a moment later, his eyes soft but cautious. I felt my chest tighten as he reached out, but I let him place a hand on my shoulder. His skin was warm, calloused from years of work, and I felt a flicker of the comfort we once shared. Yet underneath, I sensed a layer of apology neither of us knew how to voice. After a few sips, I ventured a question, voice small. Do you think we can really move forward? He paused, gaze drifting to the window where leaves danced in a gentle breeze. His jaw clenched, and I saw his Adam's apple bob before he answered. I want to try, he said, his voice heavy with something like hope and fear tangled together. I nodded, feeling tears pinch my eyes, and turned away to stir my coffee. Heat from the mug seeped into my fingers and grounded me in the moment. A tightness eased slightly in my chest, but a new ache took its place, a cautious optimism I wasn't sure I deserved. My stomach fluttered, an odd mix of excitement and dread rattling through me. We ate silently, the clink of cutlery punctuating the hush. I watched him chew slowly, fingers drumming the table. I recognized the ritual. He always ate thoughtfully, but today every motion felt loaded. My jaw ached from chewing, and I could feel a tension knot in my shoulders. Each bite felt like deciding whether to trust again. After breakfast, he suggested a walk. I felt my pulse spike, but I agreed. We left the apartment, the air crisp, carrying the scent of dew and newly trimmed grass. I wrapped my scarf tighter, heart thudding as we stepped onto the path we once strolled hand in hand. Every familiar landmark now felt heavy with memory. He reached for my hand, and I hesitated before sliding my fingers into his. The simple contact sent a shock through me, like electricity under my skin. His palm was warm and steady, and I felt the echo of something I'd almost forgotten, safety. But in my chest, a small ache whispered that safety could be fragile again. We walked in silence until he pointed out a bench overlooking the pond. I nodded and we sat, the boards creaking under our weight. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and stared at the water. I watched the ripples disturb the reflection of the sky, thinking about how trust could shatter just as easily. My hands folded in my lap, still. He cleared his throat and turned to me, eyes earnest. I know I can't erase what happened, he said, voice soft. But I want to earn your trust again, every day. His words landed like stones in my gut, weighty and unyielding. I felt tears well up, throat closing, but I nodded, letting them fall. My cheeks burned. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded note. I wrote this last night, he murmured. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. Inside were no messages, just a promise, a list of small things he would do to rebuild trust, leave morning notes, plan a weekly date, be transparent with his phone. My breath hitched. His plan was modest but earnest, and I felt warmth bloom in my chest. The ache of betrayal was still there, but it softened at the edges. I folded the note and tucked it into my pocket, pressing it against my heart. I squeezed his hand and whispered, I'll try. My voice cracked, but I meant it. We stood there in the quiet of the park, two broken people learning how to stand again. The sunlight dappled through the branches, and I realized that healing would be slow, fragile, but possible. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding, and as I exhaled, I felt a thread of hope weaving through the fractures in my heart. I woke before dawn again, heart fluttering even before my eyes opened. The morning light was pale, and I lay still for a moment, listening to his breathing beside me. Relief and dread tangled in my chest, each breath a reminder that we were here, together and fragile. I wanted so badly to believe we could rebuild, but beneath the calm, a tremor of doubt ran through me, making my hands brush against the sheets as if testing their solidity. When I slipped out of bed, he was already in the kitchen, humming softly as he prepared tea. The simple sound made my chest tighten. It reminded me of better times, and I realized I both craved and dreaded it. I unpacked our mugs from the cabinet and set them on the counter, feeling the cool ceramic under my fingers. He glanced over his shoulder, smiled, and my stomach lurched. I offered a small smile in return, willing my hands to still their tremble. We sipped our tea in silence, watching steam curl in the air. He cleared his throat and offered to take my hand, but I let him wait until I reached out first. His palm was steady in mine, and for a moment the world felt aligned. I blinked back worry and whispered, "Thank you." He nodded, eyes soft. I meant it, even though part of me wondered if gratitude could mask the ache beneath. Later, when he left for work, I stayed behind, lingering by the window until I saw his coat disappear around the corner. The empty hallway felt too quiet. I pressed my ear to the door, half expecting to hear a knock or a whisper. Nothing. I walked back to the living room and sank onto the couch, legs drawn up, arms wrapped around my knees. My jaw clenched, and I rubbed my palms over my cheeks, trying to wipe away a sudden rush of tears I didn't want to shed. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I stared at it, reluctance pooling in my stomach. His number flashed, and I hesitated before sliding to answer. "Hey," I said, voice flat. "Everything okay?" His voice crackled with fatigue. "Just wanted to check in," he said. "Missing you." I felt a warm pulse of something, pride, maybe, or longing, but then anxiety knotted my brow. "I'm fine," I lied. "Busy with work." I ended the call quickly, palms sweating, chest pounding. I set the phone down with more force than I intended, the echo startling in the hush. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of household tasks. I washed dishes, the water running over my wrists, filling my senses with mundane sounds. Yet each splash of water sounded like a warning. I folded laundry, catching a glimpse of my reflection in the window with each turn. My posture was stiff, shoulders high, and I realized my body had become an instrument of tension. Midday rolled around, and I decided to visit a small artisan shop we'd passed on our walks. I needed a distraction and hoped the soft colors of handmade pottery would calm me. I wandered the aisles, running my fingers along clay vases and hand-painted mugs. My breathing eased slightly in the warm, earthy scents. I picked up a vase, the one with a slender neck and a pale blue glaze, and cradled it in my hands. It felt solid, reliable. Like maybe people could be, too. At the counter, the shopkeeper complimented my choice, and I found myself smiling genuinely. I told her it was for the living room, a fresh start. She nodded, unaware of the storm I carried inside. I paid and wrapped the vase carefully, holding it close as I walked back home. When I stepped inside, the apartment smelled faintly of his cologne. My chest fluttered as I set the vase on the mantel. I turned to find him standing in the doorway, wet hair still damp from a sudden lunch break visit. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "I missed you," he said, crossing the room. He slipped an arm around my waist, and I froze, breath catching. My body stiffened against his touch. I wanted to lean in, to feel his warmth, but I hesitated, heart thudding like a warning drum. He lifted the vase, tracing its shape with a finger. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "Just like you." A warmth bloomed in my chest, and I felt my resolve slip. But then I remembered the empty hallway, his early morning call, the tremble in my hands. I drew back slightly, keeping my distance. "Thank you," I whispered, voice gentle but firm. I woke early to the sound of rain tapping against the window. The gentle rhythm should have soothed me, but instead my chest tightened and I lay there, tracing patterns on the ceiling with my eyes. He was still sleeping next to me, breathing slow and even, as if the past week had never happened. I wanted to reach out and feel the rise and fall of his chest, but every fiber of my body resisted, reminding me of how fragile our peace had been. Eventually I slipped out of bed and padded into the kitchen. The countertop was cluttered with yesterday's mugs and a lone envelope I hadn't opened. I stared at it for a moment, fingers itching to tear it open, but I set it aside. The rain's steady beat accompanied my coffee ritual, the steam curling around my face like a gentle apology. I sipped and tried to summon calm, but my heart still jangled in my throat. Minutes later he joined me, fresh out of the shower, hair wet and eyes apologetic. He offered a soft smile and asked how I was. I nodded, voice catching, and he reached for my hand. I let him hold it for a moment before sliding away. He watched me, uncertainty in his gaze, and I felt a flare of guilt. I didn't want to push him away entirely, but I wasn't ready to let him in completely either. I saw your note, he said quietly, nodding toward the counter. His voice was tentative, as if he feared my answer. I froze, spoon halfway to my lips, then set it down. I haven't had a chance to open it, I admitted. He exhaled softly, relief flickering across his face. I wrote it in case you needed clarity, he explained. No pressure. His words were gentle, but they carried an undercurrent of hope. I took a shaky breath and reached for the envelope. The paper crinkled between my fingers as I slid it open. Inside was a single sheet, his handwriting looping carefully. I'm sorry for every tear I caused, for every moment you doubted me, for every quiet fear you carried alone. I promise to be honest with my feelings, to share my doubts before they fester, to rebuild your trust with every choice. Please take whatever time you need. I'm here. My vision blurred as I read, and I felt warmth flood through me. The simplicity of his words cut through the tangled knot in my chest. I looked at him and saw tears in his eyes. For a heartbeat I forgot all the walls I'd built. I wanted to collapse into his arms, to let him heal me. But deep down I knew healing couldn't be rushed. I folded the letter and tucked it into my pocket. Thank you, I whispered, voice trembling. He nodded, as if each syllable carried the gravity of our past week. The day stretched ahead, damp and gray, but for the first time I felt a crack of sunlight in my spirit. I decided to meet my friend for lunch, someone who'd listened without judgment. I bundled up and left, letting the rain wash over me. I needed to reclaim moments that weren't overshadowed by our crisis. At the cafe, we talked about everything and nothing. I laughed at her jokes, the sound foreign yet precious on my lips. Walking home later, the street puddles mirrored the sky, and I felt a small serenity. I knew I would still have doubts, sleepless nights and sudden pangs of loneliness, but I also knew I could face them. The envelope in my pocket was a lifeline, and his steady presence at home was a promise. I unlocked the door and stepped inside to find him waiting, concern etched on his face. We sat side by side on the couch, hands brushing until we held each other's. He leaned his head on my shoulder and exhaled. I let my tension melt, resting my head against his. The rain pattered on, a soft lullaby for two hearts learning to beat together again. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be easy, but in that moment I realized we were more than the storm. We were two people choosing to stay, to heal, to trust. And that choice, fragile as it was, felt like the strongest foundation we could build. One evening, I noticed my phone buzzing with a notification I hadn't seen coming. I froze where I stood, hands curled into fists at my sides, fingernails digging crescent moons into my palms. The message preview showed a name I'd long since erased from my contacts, his. My breath hitched, chest tightening so fiercely it felt like my ribs were squeezing my lungs. I hadn't heard from him in days, and the peace I'd started to feel wavered in that second. My hands shook as I tapped the screen. The message was brief: "Can we meet?" No context, no apology, nothing but those 3 words. My stomach dropped, a knot so heavy that I almost dropped the phone. I pressed the side of my palm against my mouth, tasting the coppery tang of panic. Why now? After everything, why would he want to see me? I paced the length of the hallway, each step echoing too loud against the walls. My heart slammed in my ears, and sweat beaded at my hairline. I replayed our fragile truce, his heartfelt note, the park bench promises, and wondered if it had all been a mistake. If it had just been my longing to believe things could change that kept me from seeing the truth. Maybe his guilt spurts were just another way to keep me close. I let out a strangled breath and flipped open my phone again. My finger hovered over reply like it was a powder keg. I thought of how he'd hurt me, how my trust had splintered under his words and actions. I thought of the envelope I'd tucked away, proof of his betrayal burning a hole in my coat pocket. My body trembled, a low hum of electric dread vibrating through my veins. I typed back a single word, "Why?" and hit send before I could second-guess myself. Instantly, regret washed over me, sharp and cold. I leaned against the door frame, forehead pressed to the cool wood, willing my racing heartbeat to slow. My mind spun, imagining scenarios I wasn't ready to face. Maybe he'd found something old and wanted to talk. Maybe he was drunk, seeking comfort. Maybe he was just testing me again. My phone chimed almost right away. "I owe you answers," he wrote. "Please." That word, I felt it sink into me like a lure. Answers. The promise of clarity, of truth, dangled in front of me. But my fists clenched tighter. I didn't know whether truth meant relief or another dagger twisting in my chest. I slid to the floor, back against the wall, knees drawn up. My palms rested on my shins, fingertips brushing the fabric of my leggings. The room felt suddenly too small, air thick like syrup. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe through the panic. In the silence behind my eyelids, I could hear my own pulse thundering, proof that I was alive, terrified, torn between old wounds and a stubborn hope. After what felt like hours but was only minutes, I stood and packed a small bag, my laptop, the envelope, a notebook. My hands moved on autopilot, each item slipping inside with a purpose. I needed a place where I could think without walls closing in, somewhere he couldn't just walk in and unsettle me again. I grabbed my keys and slipped out, the door clicking shut with a finality that echoed through my chest. Outside, the night air was cool, a balm against my hot skin. I walked without direction until I found myself at the edge of the same park pond where we'd once decided to try again. The water lay dark and still, reflecting street lamps like scattered stars. I perched on a bench, bag at my feet, and opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I brought up the draft email I'd nearly sent months ago, before I'd held on to mercy instead of fury. It was untouched, waiting. The subject line spelled out my intent in stark letters: the truth and consequences. I stared at the screen, vision blurring at the edges. Then my phone buzzed again. "Please. Tonight." I closed my eyes and exhaled, a long, shaky exhale that emptied my lungs of air and left my thoughts raw. I thought of his haunted eyes when I'd confronted him, the weight of his shame pressing into mine. I thought of every tear, every sleepless night, every trembling doubt. And I realized that seeking answers could either soothe me or rip open the wound again. I clicked into my draft. My fingers found the keys, words pouring out, a clear, unflinching account of everything: his betrayal, his lies, my pain. Then I added the proofs, the photo, the messages, the promise he'd broken. And finally, I laid out my terms: no meeting, no more chances, just closure. I would send it to him, and to everyone in his life who deserved to know the man he'd chosen over me. My heart thundered as I hit send. The email whooshed away into cyberspace, carrying my raw confession and my final stand. My breath caught, and tears sprung to my eyes, but this time it wasn't fear or sorrow, it was release. I closed the laptop and watched my reflection in the dark screen, a woman reshaped by both mercy and revenge, standing at the edge of her own power. The pond rippled with a breeze, and I let its cool whisper soothe my nerves. I didn't know what would happen next, if he'd reply, if I'd regret this, but for the first time, I felt certain of one thing: I was no longer waiting for someone else's answers to define me. I stayed by the pond until the world went quiet, the glow of street lamps blinking off one by one as the night deepened. The email had sent the moment I pressed send, and yet it felt like I'd just unleashed a storm I could barely contain. I tucked my laptop into my bag and gazed at the water's surface. My reflection wavered in the ripples, a woman transformed by the weight of her own words. When I finally rose, legs stiff and shoulders tight, I realized how late it must have been. The path back to my apartment felt unfamiliar, each bench and lamppost seeming to judge me with their silent witness. My phone buzzed again, no name this time, just the envelope icon pulsing insistently. I resisted the urge to check it, shoving the device into my pocket like it was venom. Inside my apartment, the rooms were dark, the hush deeper than before. I flipped on a single lamp in the living room and slid onto the couch, pulling my knees to my chest. My bag sat beside me, the envelope of letters and proofs still tucked inside. I reached for it, my fingers tracing the crease where I'd folded the note from his sincere apology. I felt the delicate weight of paper beneath my fingertips and breathed in a slow, trembling breath. I didn't expect immediate closure. I knew that sending that email would shift things, but I wasn't sure how. Would he lash out? Would he crumble? The uncertainty was suffocating, yet it was also liberating. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my heartbeat, but each pulse felt like a drumbeat echoing my own resolve. My phone lit up again. This time, a new message from him appeared. "I'm so sorry. I'll explain everything, but please, let me in." I stared at the screen, vision blurring with the lights. My chest tightened, knowing he was reaching out, wanting me to let him back in, felt like a test I wasn't sure I could pass. My thumb hovered over reply, but I shook my head and locked the screen. I stood and paced the room, bare feet cold against the floor. I thought of his face, eyes hollow with regret, and I remembered the tremor in my own hands, the nights I'd lain awake wondering if forgiveness was ever possible. The desire to confront him, to hear every excuse and justification, warred with my need to protect the fragile peace I'd begun to build. I opened the envelope and pulled out the proofs once more. The photo, 2 men laughing, bodies close. The messages, confessions of longing I'd never heard toward me. I let each slip through my fingers, one by one, and placed them in a neat pile on the coffee table. I sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded in my lap, and watched them as if they were embers still smoldering from a fire. I realized then that I didn't need his explanations to validate my pain. His apology note, his plea for a meeting, those were his attempts to broker another compromise, to salvage what he'd torn apart. But the cost of that compromise would always be my safety, my trust. I let out a soft laugh, shaky and incredulous. The thought of letting him back through that door, back into my life, was too dangerous. I closed my eyes and thought of my sister's voice on the phone, steady and compassionate. Her words returned, "You deserve honesty. You deserve boundaries." I realized that setting those boundaries meant I wouldn't answer his calls, wouldn't open my door for him again. It didn't mean I didn't care, it meant I was protecting what remained of me. I stood and gathered the papers, sliding them back into the envelope. Then I took out my phone and opened my email app. I typed a reply to his message, each word carefully measured. "I'm not ready to meet. I need time to heal without confusion. Please respect my space." I paused, reading it over, feeling the firmness in my own voice. Then I hit send. The confirmation ping felt quiet but resolute. I folded my arms across my chest and leaned back on the couch, exhaling a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The apartment felt less like a cage and more like a sanctuary, dark yet safe. The night crept forward, and I let sleep find me, eyelids heavy, tension easing from my shoulders. When I woke the next morning, the first thought in my mind was not of him, but of me, of the choice I'd made to reclaim my boundaries. The sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the possibility of something new, not a reconciliation, but a fresh start. ChatGPT. I woke to silence thicker than usual, the kind that presses against your ears and makes you aware of every breath. The empty apartment felt like a cocoon and a cage all at once. I lay still for a long minute, letting my heart slow from the race it ran the night before. My fingers itched to check my phone, but I resisted. I needed space to feel what was real, not just reaction. Eventually I slid out of bed and padded to the window. The sky was pale, like it hadn't quite decided to wake up yet. I pressed my forehead to the glass and watched a lone bird flit between rooftops. Its freedom stung. I turned away, sensing his presence behind me before I heard a step. He stood in the doorway, silent, tentative, like he wasn't sure if he had the right. My throat closed up at the sight of him, the familiar curve of his shoulders, and I felt that old tremor twist in my chest. He cleared his throat. "I didn't reach out last night," he said softly. "I thought you needed space." His voice was gentle, but it cut through me. I nodded without turning, tracing a crack in the hardwood floor with my toe. "I did," I answered, voice barely more than a whisper. "I needed to see if I could stand without waiting for you." He took a step closer, and I braced myself, every muscle coiled. "And?" he asked, uncertainty pooling in his eyes. I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze. "I did," I said. I stood. I wanted boundaries, and I got them. My voice wavered, but I felt stronger saying it. He exhaled, relief and regret mingling in that single breath. I turned and walked to the kitchen, pouring water into the kettle. The click of the switch sounded loud in the stillness. He followed and hovered by the counter, hands shoved into his pockets. When the kettle whistled, I poured and offered him a cup. He took it, fingers brushing mine, and I felt a spark of the old comfort, before guilt pushed it away. We sipped our tea in silence, steam curling around us like a fragile veil. I studied him in the kettle's glow, hoping to see the man who'd once been my safe place. His eyes flicked up, and I caught a glint of something, determination, maybe, or fear of losing me again. He set his mug down, voice low. "I've been thinking. I want us to reclaim moments that aren't tainted by what happened." My chest tightened at the suggestion, a picnic in the park, maybe, or a movie night without phones. But I nodded, willing my heart to believe. "Okay," I replied, voice small but steady. "But on my terms." He gave me a tentative smile, and I felt a flicker of hope. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded list he'd given me earlier, the small promises he'd made to rebuild my trust. I laid it on the counter between our mugs. "Let's start with one," I said, tracing the first item with my fingertip, morning notes. His smile widened, relief softening his features. I picked up my mug and raised it slightly. "To new beginnings," I murmured. He clinked his mug against mine. The sound was gentle, hopeful, and I let it echo in the quiet kitchen. For a moment, peace wasn't just loud, it was enough. I felt a strange restlessness that morning, like my skin thrummed with static electricity. I kept checking the front door, half expecting him to walk through and shatter the fragile peace we'd built at the park. The apartment felt too familiar and yet somehow foreign, as if every cushion and corner were on guard. My hands were cold as I brewed coffee, fingertips numb, and my tongue felt thick with uncertainty. He sat across from me at the small kitchen table, reading the paper, the mug cradled between his palms. His brow furrowed in concentration, and I realized that even this simple image, one I had once found comforting, now made my heart flutter with both longing and dread. I sipped my coffee, eyes on the steam curling up from the cup, pretending to watch the shapes dance. My jaw was locked tight, and I swallowed against the dryness that stiffened my throat. Later that afternoon, he suggested we call my friend to join us for an early dinner. I hesitated at the suggestion. The idea of mixing old normal with our new normal felt like a tightrope act. But I nodded, voice small, "Sure." I reminded myself that trust was forged in moments shared with others, not just those we carved out alone. He smiled, relief soft in his eyes, and that warmth flickered across my chest like a spark. We chose a small bistro down the street, the kind with wooden tables and hanging plants that made you feel at home. My friend arrived, her bright laugh ricocheting off the walls, and for a while, I slipped into the ease of conversation. We ordered wine and talked about trivial things, movies, work, a funny story about her cat. My partner was attentive, leaning in whenever I spoke, and I felt a swell of hope. Maybe this was the proof I needed that we could truly move forward. Halfway through the meal, I excused myself to the restroom. On my way back, I passed the bar where a small dish of mince sat on a coaster. I reached for one, and my fingers brushed the edge of the coaster, sending a jolt up my arm. The words scribbled on the coaster, "Remember," sent my pulse racing. I pulled my hand back, breath catching. Panic twisted my stomach, and I gripped the counter to steady myself. Inside me, a storm broke. Every memory of betrayal and late-night doubts rose up, crashing through the calm we'd built. My hands trembled as I splashed cold water on my face. My cheeks were hot with shame and fear, and I whispered to my reflection, "Why am I still like this?" My reflection stared back, eyes wide with the same terror I felt. I returned to the table, teeth aching from clenching, and forced a smile. My friend noticed, plunging into concern. "Suzan, are you okay?" she asked, voice gentle. My partner looked up from his glass, worry creasing his features. I nodded too quickly, chewing my lip. "Just tired," I lied, the words bitter in my mouth. They accepted it, oblivious to the war raging inside me. When we got home, I led him to the couch and sank onto it, pulling him close. The action felt almost instinctive, a need for comfort in the wake of my panic. He wrapped his arms around me, and I pressed my face into his shirt, breathing in his scent. My shoulders trembled as tears slid down my cheeks. I didn't speak, I just let the emotions spill. He held me through my sobs, whispering apologies and gentle reassurances. I felt his heartbeat slow mine, pulse by pulse. His warmth seeped into me, and I thought maybe this was enough, this shared brokenness and his willingness to stay. My hands clutched his shirt, nails grazing the fabric, and I realized that healing wasn't linear. It would come in moments of strength and moments just like this. I lifted my head and met his eyes, voice trembling. I'm scared I'll never trust fully." My words fell into the quiet, and his gaze softened. "I know," he said. "But I'll keep proving myself. Until you can." His promise was simple, yet it stretched across the gap between us, a fragile bridge. I nodded, resting my cheek against his chest. The tremor in my body eased to a soft hum, and I let myself believe, if only for a moment, that trust could be rebuilt in fragments like these: shared fears, small tremors, and unwavering presence. I woke to an uneasy calm the next morning, like the world held its breath and waited. I lay beside him, memorizing the rise and fall of his chest, each breath a reminder that we were still here, still trying. My limbs felt heavy as if gravity had increased overnight. I rose quietly and dressed, choosing clothes that felt familiar: a soft sweater, jeans worn just enough to feel like a second skin. I slipped out without a word, needing air before words could betray me again. Outside, the sky was a pale wash of light, the kind you see just before everything fully wakes. I walked without direction, letting my feet choose the path. My heart pounded with both anticipation and dread. I ended up at the edge of the pond once more, that place where beginnings and endings blurred together. Dew clung to the grass, each blade glinting like a promise. I sat on a bench and watched the water shiver in the breeze. He joined me a few minutes later, his footsteps soft on the grass. He didn't speak, he just sat down beside me, shoulder brushing mine. I felt a flicker of the old ache, fear mingled with hope, but I held steady, turning to look at him. His face was open, vulnerable, the early light softening his features. "I thought you might come here," he said, voice low. I nodded, heart thudding so loud I thought he'd hear it. "It's where everything changed," I replied, voice catching. "And where I need to figure out if it can change again." My fingers traced the grain of the bench, finding comfort in its solidity. He swallowed, gaze on the water. "I've been thinking about what comes next," he said. "About how to prove myself, not with grand gestures, but everyday moments." His words landed like stones in my chest, weighty but grounding. I realized I wanted to hear the plan, the details that would shape our future. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. My breath hitched as I took it. Inside was a list, each item numbered plainly. "Leave a note every morning with one thing I appreciate about you. Share my location when I'm running late, no secrets. Plan a monthly adventure, something new for us to learn together. Schedule a weekly, no-tech evening, just us and conversation. Attend therapy sessions together and solo." My fingers trembled as I read. The simplicity of it struck me, the focus on small, consistent acts instead of sweeping apologies. I looked at him, tears pooling at my eyelids. "You really thought this through," I whispered, His nod was slight, but earnest. I did, he said. Because you deserve more than words. He paused, as if choosing them carefully. I deserve to earn your trust every day. The openness in his eyes felt like an offering. A breeze rustled the leaves, and I closed my eyes, letting the moment settle. I thought of the nights I'd woken in panic, the notes of apology and betrayal that had once plagued me. Now, I held this list, a blueprint for rebuilding. My chest loosened, the heaviness easing to something lighter, more hopeful. When I opened my eyes, I saw a reflection in the water, two figures side by side, hesitant but willing. I folded the paper and tucked it into my coat pocket as a talisman. Yes, I said softly. I want that. All of it. My voice carried both relief and resolve. He exhaled, and relief washed across his face. He slipped his hand into mine, fingers lacing together naturally. Thank you, he murmured. I won't let you down. I pressed my thumb against his knuckles, feeling the warmth beneath the skin. I know, I replied. And I'll hold you to it. We sat there in silence, watching the pond's ripples spread outward, a mirror of the change unfolding between us. The bench beneath us felt solid, the morning breeze cool but comforting. In that quiet, I realized that trust wasn't a single gift, it was a series of choices, made again and again. He squeezed my hand, and I leaned into him, resting my head on his shoulder. The tremor in my chest had lifted enough to breathe freely, if only slightly. We stayed like that until the sun climbed higher, lighting our faces with a promise that tomorrow could be different.